With that, we hope to move on to the next discussion for today. And as GSP Plus is a controversial topic these days, we hope to extend our discussion further and evaluate its impact on capital market. And we have with us Travis Gomez from Frontier Research joining us today for a detailed discussion and to extend this conversation to evaluate its impact on capital markets. We welcome you warmly, Travis.
Thanks, good evening.
Yes, let's begin the conversation by talking about how the stock market would get affected with GSP Plus coming in.
Okay, so if I first start off by going back in terms of, right now the reason why this is such a big deal in terms of GSP Plus is because we got it back because in 2010 we basically lost it for various reasons, and basically it's the way it's portrayed in the media and the way it's talked about by politicians. It's basically perceived as being a big deal, and this is something that can basically boost our exports and kind of basically give a boost to the economy. So if I were to basically elaborate on what went on during that period between 2010 to now, basically what has happened is a lot of the companies that were more towards like export oriented, some of them basically were affected. So basically some of them were affected to a great extent, some to not a great extent. So one company that really comes to mind, which is really good to illustrate, was basically the Haley's Group, which typically it's very much export oriented. It used to be very much exposed towards like the European Union. So if you take a lot of the companies within the Haley's Group, you have companies like Dip Products, which are into like rubber manufacturing. Then you have Haycarb, which does these activated carbon. Then you have basically the Haley's Fabric. And a lot of them really, they were basically export oriented and directed towards the EU. So what we saw happening with the loss of GSP Plus with Tuoten, so partly as a result of that, as well as due to the global downturn, their exposure to Europe and their exposure to the export market as a whole has kind of come down. Okay, so at the same time also what was going on domestically was, with the ending of the war and all, there was more opportunities locally as well. So because of that, they strategically shifted to basically investing in the local economy. So they were focusing a lot on construction, a lot on tourism sector, on a lot of power and energy. So because of that, if you look at what's happened, basically their exposure to export markets have basically come down. So it sort of coincided with basically this loss of GSP Plus and the relative weaknesses that we were seeing in Europe. So now with the recovery of GSP Plus, maybe we might see some turnaround as a result of that.
Okay, how important is GSP Plus for Sri Lanka? Can we do without, or it, or is it imperative that we get this status?
So that's again a very that's why when you say it's a controversial topic, that's also one reason, because if you take so the issue is we don't really have a lot of data to see in terms of how the specific companies are doing. So if you take the stock market, we don't have many like listed garment industries that are listed on the stock exchange. So one, the more popular example is we have Sri Lanka, formerly Textile Jersey, and based on what the management has said and given the type of industry they are in, so basically they have not seen, in terms of if you look at their revenue performance and their bottom line and their margins, it really hasn't had much of a material impact on them in terms of their growth, in terms of their performance. This loss of GSP Plus doesn't really seem to have affected them so much, because the reason being, this GSP Plus is really meant to basically help out really low income countries and low middle income countries to basically get a foothold in Europe and to basically to give them a leg up. So in that space, when it comes to garments, we are mostly competing with countries which are in that status, so like Bangladesh and Pakistan, who are more towards like the lower, basically we are competing more on cost based. But actually if you take companies like Sri Lanka and a lot of the larger garment factories you have in Sri Lanka, like Mars Holdings and Hydramani and the people like that, basically they are competing more on the innovation side. So you have all the smart factories, then they invest a lot in this nanotechnology, in terms of the quality of the service, we have like better lead times and all of that. So as a result of that, they haven't really seen like a big drop because of this. At the same time, what has been happening is a lot of these larger larger manufacturers also, they basically part of their operations, they'll be moving them to these countries which are still enjoying the GSP plus, like Bangladesh, and so basically countries in the South Asian region. So because of that, they've kind of been able to mitigate some of these losses, some of these downturns because of this. So overall, if you look in terms of their performance of the specific companies, it doesn't seem to have made a big impact.
Okay, what is the current situation with the stock market? Because with the recent announcement of GSP Plus being reinstated, so how did the market react to this?
In terms of the market, we did not see much of a reaction. Again, I think the perception, I think, on this is that, this has been talked about for a long time, that, the politicians have been kept talking about this, that you're going to get it soon. And, I think the market has kind of already factored it in to a certain extent. And at the same time, they also understand that this benefit is not going to, you're not going to really see a material development for a while, because it's, factories are not going to open up overnight because of this. It's going to take a while to actually see some tangible benefit that can come from this. So the market also has not really reacted as much to this.
Any particular sectors that would benefit significantly with GSP Plus coming in?
Okay, so I mean, the one that's talked about a lot most is of course the garments. Which is understandable, given that most of our, in terms of our export basket, yes, a large proportion is basically apparels, and a big chunk of that basically goes to the EU. Yes, so with regard to that, yes, the GSP Plus would help us to a certain extent in terms of our competitiveness. But on the other hand, really an important point that was brought up by the EU delegation that is here in Sri Lanka when they basically announced this, was to say that, okay, I mean, we are coming back to this GSP Plus scheme after 6 years, where the other countries that have been benefiting from this have had 6 years to basically capitalize on that. So an important point the EU representative here was making was that, if you're going back to the EU, we can't just depend solely on garments. We have to really diversify to other sectors as well. So yes, on the one hand, we might see greater activity when it comes to garments here, because we have the cost factor, and at the same time, basically the apparel, the buyers, they want to sort of like diversify their risks. They don't want to just rely on a few countries. So some of those operations that went to Bangladesh, that went to Pakistan, part of that might come back to Sri Lanka, but that's more long term. But at the same time, I mean, what we really should be focusing on the garment side is really, on the innovation side, and moving towards like the high end, moving up the value chain when it comes to the garment side. So with regard to garments, I think that's there is some potential with regard to GSP Plus. The other sort of sectors that we can really stand to benefit is, one is with regard to the agribusiness. So a lot of these export of like organic fruits and vegetables, and as well as when it comes to things like the fisheries is another important one. So these canned fish, as well as these basically ornamental fish. There's a lot of potential for that. So again, if I take the example of Haley's, the Haley's agribusiness, which basically is engaged in this ornamental fish and these export of fruits and vegetables, they have seen tremendous growth in recent years, and that because there's a huge demand potential for that type of food, given the people's changing lifestyles and all of that, where there's a preference for more of these types of organic food and natural type of food. There is a lot of growth potential for that. So industries like that also can see some growth. And apart from that, there's also a whole host of other related industries that we can go into. So like things like cables, things like electronics, these like different component manufacturing. There's a lot of potential that we can go for that we haven't really looked at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Travis, for joining us today.